Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's video, I want to talk about the two cameras that have been going everywhere with me over the past few years for personal travel, why I choose them, and how they fit my approach to photography in both the shooting and editing process. These two cameras are the Nikon F3 and the Fuji X100V. So one 35mm film camera and one digital camera. I'm not going to cover every aspect of these cameras and their specs, but the F3 is a fully manual, relatively small, fairly affordable, and ruggedly built camera body that is just a joy to use. And I pair it with two lenses, the 28mm 2.8 and a 50 1.4. I'm sure most of you already know about the X100V at this point. It's become sort of this weird internet sensation recently, but it's an incredible little camera, super lightweight and small. Amazing image quality, and it has a built-in f2 lens that has a 35mm equivalent focal length. So you might be picking up on something here already. That lineup gives me a 28, a 35, and a 50, which are all three of my favorite focal lengths. And everything fits into a really small package. You can fit it in any kind of little space that you have left, even just tucked into whatever bag or backpack you're already bringing on your travels if that's necessary. Oftentimes I'll leave the 50 at home also just to travel even lighter and not worry about switching lenses when I'm out and about, because it's by far my least used and least favorite lens of the three. So that's the first thing I love, the small form factor and the minimal fuss that these cameras bring along. To show you some images from these cameras and give you some context for the rest of this discussion, let's take a look back at a road trip that I went on last summer in Northern California, Oregon, Washington, and Montana. We started our hike in the redwoods just after sunrise. The sun was beaming through the forest and made for some fun but somewhat challenging lighting conditions. Out of these photos, I think I tend to prefer the shots with the 28mm on the F3. The size of the trees and the density of the forest was just easier to capture on a bit wider of a lens. It made the images feel a little less claustrophobic in comparison to the slightly tighter shots from the X100V. This is a great example of why I like having these two options while shooting. You could obviously do this with any camera and a few lens options, but having one on digital and one on film has many other advantages, which I'll get to here in a minute. That night we stayed in a really incredible cabin outside of Mount Hood in Oregon. We made it just in time for golden hour, so I walked around the area and just found pockets of light and details that appealed to me. This location is a good place to talk about another reason why I like pairing these cameras together for my workflow. When I get back from a trip, I always develop and scan the film before I look or even start editing my digital photos. I do this so that I have a reference of how the scene looked on the film stock that I chose to shoot at that time. Many times that reference will guide my editing decisions, and I'll try to get somewhat close to the look of the film photos if, and it's a big if, I really love the look. I'll often do this while color grading my footage as well. Sometimes though, it ends up being the other way around too, which is the situation where I'm not as much of a fan of the colors and contrast of a scene on the film that I shot, and instead use that film as a reference of an example of what I don't want the final digital edit to look like. So being flexible and open-minded and seeing what's possible is really what I enjoy about this approach of using both mediums. Neither format is superior, but they can give you ideas and results that are very different from one another. The next morning, we woke up painfully early and went to a lake near the base of the mountain to watch sunrise. It was an incredibly peaceful and quiet morning. We watched the birds fly above the lake and the sun light up the fog at the base of the mountain, giving us quite the show. On the way back towards Washington, I pulled off the route to shoot this scene we were driving through. I just couldn't resist, so I pulled over. This was a scenario where I really loved the look of the film, and as a challenge to myself, tried to replicate the look as precisely as I could with the raw digital file off the Fuji in Lightroom. I don't think they're identical by any means, but they are pretty darn close, and I'm quite happy with the result. I've explored this idea of precisely mimicking the look of certain film stocks before, and I think I'm going to create a pack of presets that closely resembles particular films and scenarios that I've shot side by side like this. So if you're interested in that, leave a comment below, and if there's enough demand for it, I'll work on those sooner than later. We took a break for a few days when we got back to Spokane and did a little sunset hike around the summit of Mount Spokane. Carl got to come along this time, which is always a huge plus. He's quite literally always the life of the party. From the top, if you looked out east, you could see the shadow of the mountain we were standing on blanketing the landscape below us, a pretty surreal feeling. It was actually a bit smoky from the wildfires up there that night. It didn't impact us immediately. It wasn't in our area, but it was sort of lingering out in the distance. And it made for a really interesting light. It was very vivid and really red as the sun went down. The final leg of this trip was a bit of a bummer, but I wanted to include it anyways. Josh and I decided to send it, as the cool kids would say, on his last day here, and we woke up and did an impromptu drive for 5.5 hours to Montana and 5.5 hours back all in one day in an attempt to try to experience it in the summertime, which neither of us had ever done. Unfortunately, it was extremely smoky over there, like way worse than here from the wildfires, and the visibility was horrendous. We made the best of the day and had a good time anyways, ultimately grabbing a handful of photos that I'm pretty happy with, all things considered. We even stopped, the only place we could find anything to eat was this little grocery store. So we stopped and went in and got PB&J and bread and made sandwiches in the back of the Subaru, which was not ideal, but a fun memory either way.
Yeah, they're closed. Everything's closed.
PB&J! The last point that I want to make is that shooting digital is a great way to have a backup or a safe copy of your images that are really important to you. If you work really hard for a shot or stumble across a moment that is like a once-in-a-lifetime photograph opportunity, then I have no shame, I don't think you should either, in capturing that moment twice, just in case something doesn't work out with the film. I love the quirks and challenges of shooting film, but I'm also, not blind to the fact that sometimes, often unexplainably, things just don't go as you expect, either in camera or in development. I think that about wraps it up for this video. As always, thank you for watching. I really appreciate you tuning in, and I will see you in the next one.